Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Commander Clash podcast, where the Commander Clash crew talks all things Commander. And this week, we are going to be talking about cards that should have been game changers. But before we get into that, we got a bunch of co-hosts to introduce. Kicking things off with Krim, probably better known as the Asian Avenger. How are you today, Krim?
Very good. I know I wasn't there to be a part of the bracket podcast
lucky
and
you.
whatnot, so trust me, I wanted to be there. Tomer, I had your back.
Grim. I
know. I'm sorry, dude.
Fighting for my life out there.
I saw. But like on top of that, I really wanted to talk about things that should be game changers, as you know, we all probably wanted to, because there were cards that were omitted from the list.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll get to that in a minute, but it's a good time to talk about them because it's still in beta and it's still in flux and we can still add things right now.
Exactly.
But we got another co-host in Krim. Or Tomer.
Wow.
We already did Krim.
Hi.
Tomer, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Excited to talk more about brackets. My biggest criticism are some of the things I think that everybody has. Everybody is not going to agree on game changers, and I obviously have opinions on that as well too. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
And we're joined by Morgan today. Phil's moving. Normally, Phil's going to be doing the podcast now that Richard is retired from the podcast. But we got Morgan filling in for Phil today. How you doing today, Morgan?
I'm doing good. I was with you there too, Tomer. I also am pro bracket. I think it's got some tweaking to do, but I'm excited to talk some game changers, and hopefully this continues to improve and help people out a lot.
So before we get into our show today, a couple of words from our sponsors. Our show today is brought to you by Foil Armor. Do you have a problem with your foils curling? Well, Foil Armor is the ultimate solution for flattening your foils. It's a two-way humidity pack that you simply put in an airtight container with your cards, and Foil Armor will absorb and release moisture, making your cards completely flat. Put a pack in your storage box to keep your cards flat forever, and you can head over to foilarmor.com and use the code MTGGoldfish to get 15% off today. And our show is also brought to you by Card Conduit, the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. If you ever get tired of the hassles of buy listing, you can skip them with Card Conduit. You can use their curated service where you send in as many cards as you want with a buy list value of $1 or more and pay just a 5% service fee. And if you want to do a bit of work, you can use a sorted service where you list and sort your cards in advance and pay just a 2% fee. Either way, you're going to get a detailed report with the results in a fast payment once your order is processed. And you can even get another 10% off by heading over to cardconduit.com/MTGGoldfish. Card Conduit, it's the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. So thanks to our sponsors. And now it's time for the comment of the week. So on last week's podcast, we had the return of Shark Tank, although really most of the comments were focused on the announcement that Richard's going to be stepping down from the podcast, not doing Commander Clash this season. So the number one comment from Just a Traveler 09, Richard isn't quitting. He's just doing less episodes so we can use catch-up ramp.
So
Perfect
good.
comment.
Yeah.
Perfect comment. A plus.
So good.
If that isn't the perfect comment to go out on for Richard.
It really
Lots
is.
of people telling him farewell.
Yeah. Yup. Anyway, let's talk some game changers. So before we get into the actual topic, I guess we got to go over what we're actually talking about. So Wizards a little while ago announced their bracket system. Not going to go through the whole bracket system again, but essentially it puts decks from 1 up to, which is the lowest powered, or the lowest, most flavorful, I guess, up to 5, which is like CDH decks, and then 2, 3, and 4 are kind of in between. But one of the interesting aspects of this new bracket system is it uses game changers. So game changers are a list of 40 cards that have a really big impact on the game. And the way the bracket system is kind of designed is if you're playing the lower levels, you don't really play with game changers. Once you get up to level 2, you can play 1 game changer. Level 3, you get 3 game changers. And then once you get up to 4 and 5, you can play as many as you want. So right now, there's a 40 card list, which honestly contains a lot of, I guess, what you would think of as the saltiest and in some cases strongest cards in Commander. A bunch of tutors, card draw effects like Rhystic Strutty, Trouble in Pairs, the One Ring, Bolus's Citadel, and then finishers like Underworld Breach, some busted commanders like Urza and Kinnan and Yuriko. So that's kind of the overview of the game changers. But what we're going to talk about today is what should be added to this list in specific? So one of the things that Wizards was pretty upfront about is this is a beta system, and the number of game changers probably going to change because as the unbanned cards, they're going to put them onto the game changer list. So we're not necessarily stuck with 40 game changers. And before we talk about the cards that we think should be added to this list, I'm kind of curious. In your mind, how many game changers do you think there should be? Because I've seen some people be like, oh, this should be a game changer, this should be a game changer, this, and they have this huge list, and I'm like, do we really want like 100 game changers? Do we want 1,000 game? Like, where do you draw the line for what qualifies something as a game changer? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm curious what y'all think. So, Krim, do you have any rough idea of like how many game changers you think there should be?
So I've been sitting and, I did a lot of like testing and talking and theory and whatnot over at Chicago and with friends and thinking out loud. I think it should be about 10 from each color.
Okay, which would put you at about what,
so
50, 60? Yeah.
Because we're going to count colorless, right?
Okay.
So I think about 10 from each would be pretty good. And that's just how many I think there should be. What qualifies itself as a game changer for me, at least, is going to be really not so much salt factor. I'm not basing this off vibes. I'm basing this off of strictly gameplay. And things that are just almost like borderline too busted to where I could see them eventually, because they said if they would ever ban anything, it would be off this list, right?
Yep.
So I think that it has to be strong enough and breaks the game in a way that does so many unfair things or gives you a silly amount of advantage. So truly a game changer, right? It has to warp the gameplay to the point where you are just so much farther ahead than the rest of the table, or it's a once in a life, like just one of the worst play experiences possible.
Interesting. All right. I think that's a good way to look at it. Although I think if I look at the list, I definitely see some of the salt scale in there too having an impact. So I think Wizards probably use both of those. Like power level is definitely a part of it because like Fierce Guardianship is just like an insanely powerful card, right? But there's also cards that are more salty, I think, than strong. Like Grand Arbiter Augustine IV isn't like necessarily a super strong card, but it is like super like the best ramp card.
Why are you nerfing my Azorius ramp? I don't
Blue ramp.
Tomer, what do you think? What is your... So Krim says about 60 game changers. Where are you at with game changers? How many do you think there should be on this list?
I like the number 50. I don't know if it should be a little bit more. It should be a little bit less. I do agree with you, Seth, that like once you get to like 100, I think it becomes just far too unwieldy. It's going to be impossible to get a list that everybody agrees with, obviously. I think that's the number one thing. But like trying to find a consensus on a couple cards, I think might be more realistic. A consensus being not like 100% all of the community agrees, because that's going to be, as I said, impossible. But like if you put like a majority vote and it got like 95% said yes, we don't want to have this in brackets 1 and 2. And brackets 1 and 2 is you're not allowed any game changers. I think that's a good spot to have it, and I think the number will be like somewhere around 50. I do think though, like that I agree with Krim that personally speaking, I don't think salt should be a major consideration. Because that's how I
vibe changer. Not a game changer.
But like, that's how I started with 2011. When I started playing Commander in 2011, like Armageddon was just a fact of life at my tables. Like the Kalia player would go Kalia into, I play a dumb angel and I have Kalia on the battlefield and you didn't kill it. Well, I Armageddon you and now you're never killing it. Sorry, bye. But like, I feel like, I don't know. I feel like too many people disagree with that. That I'm okay to yield on that, and I'm okay to just ban some. If like again, 95% of the people say I don't want to deal with like Armageddon at the table, regardless of power level, I'm okay being like, okay, some cards are game changers due to salt or whatever.
At the risk of dragging us two back into a podcast from a couple weeks ago, if it's not a power ranking and about power, why are our game changers purely about power? Isn't this whole thing about vibes? I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Isn't the entire idea of the bracket system supposed to be about vibes?
Yes.
So if this whole thing is about vibes, why would we throw vibes out the window when it comes to what is a pretty big aspect of the system? So I guess that would be my criticism of the disregard vibes, because I feel like you have to think of this as being purely about vibes or it kind of falls apart.
That's a good point.
I agree to an extent, but like Armageddon is not a vibe changer. That truly is a game changer, right? So yes, some of the salt cards will align with what I think is miserable gameplay. Not, but like, so it's not like, oh, you know, the like mass land destruction, it should be free reign, right? Like it's still on there.
Yeah,
it's still on there.
I'll clarify that. Like, that's 100%. You're 100% accurate. It's just for me, like the vibes of like somebody dropping down a giant magistrate doesn't really affect me because I don't know. I've been prepared because I've dealt with that so much. Like certain cards I've dealt with so much that they don't really ruin my vibe because I've expected it. But I can totally imagine like people who joined from more modern days, you know, like they started playing Commander like last year or this year or something, and they haven't seen they don't know what Blood Moon is. I can imagine if you're not mentally prepared to start dealing with these type of cards, it could be a bad vibe. I don't know if you bust out your precon level deck and somebody Blood Moons you out of the game or something like that. You have to be exposed to it over time, I guess. So I agree with you, Seth, on that.
What about you, Morgan? Where are you at with the number of game changers?
I think the actual number of game changers probably doesn't really matter. I think a digestible, clean number is nice. Like 40 is kind of a nice number. 50 would also be kind of a nice number, but that is a lot of cards. But I think there's also like 90 cards on the actual Commander ban list. That's not like a small amount of cards. Like I think in a perfect world, it would be a small enough number that I could ask you, what are the game changers? And you could just automatically tell me what they are.
Yeah.
But I think realistically, that's not going to happen. I think we are going to end up with a big enough list. But as we've seen implemented on MTG Goldfish and Moxfield and Scryfall, is that there are markers on all of these deck building tools that tell you what the game changers are. So it should be really easy to track, even if you can't figure it out off the top of your head. And I think as long as those resources are readily available to players, I think it doesn't really matter how many game changers there are. And I will say that I think game changers should have to do it's yes, power, but it's also a vibe check, right? Like if we're just talking like purely on salt, like Armageddon is technically not on the game changers list, even though they have a subsection in their article saying that like mass land destruction doesn't pass the vibe check, that is lower bracket. But like, shouldn't we just like cover the bases and put it on the list anyways? Like just do it just for clarity's sake. And then also like if we're just talking purely power, you know, red only has 2 cards on there. Insurrection just kind of wins games out of nowhere all the time, right? But it's not like, it's kind of a letdown. It's kind of an anticlimactic way to win the game, but it's also like 8 mana. If there's enough creatures on the board, I probably win the game. Like, that's fair enough, I guess. So it's not just about power. It's also about vibe. So I think cards like Smothering Tithe, I think, are a great example. It's salty and annoying because you keep having to ask to pay the 2, even though no one's going to pay the 2, and also very powerful. So those are like the perfect examples of cards that should be game changers, or cards that are a little bit salty and a little bit too strong, I think, are the greatest examples.
Yeah, I think most of them will probably be some extent like both of those, or either like very high in one of those and maybe not as much in the other. But I think both play into it. I would say I'm kind of with Morgan that I don't think the exact number, outside of like nice round numbers being positives in our brain, I guess, but like there's not really any upside to having an exact number of these. If it's 63 or 60 or 71 or like, it doesn't really matter. My only concern would be, I think it could get unwieldy, like Tomer said, if you go too far. Like if there's 500 game changers or something, I think it just gets overwhelming. And I think that could lead to people just like opting out of the system altogether. And if we want people to try this system, I think it's going to be important to make it like digestible enough that that they actually feel like they can do it, and we'll give it a shot. When if you're just like, here's 1,000 cards that are game changers, I would just be like, okay, I don't even want to think about this. It's just too much for me to think about, so I'm just going to keep doing what I've been doing.
Well, they also could adjust how many game changers you're allowed. Like maybe in bracket 3, they could bump it up to 5, or maybe at the lower tier, maybe you can be allowed 1, because a lot of those are like, you know, pre-con power level, but then some of the game changers are pre-con cards, you know? Yeah. So they could maybe adjust there if they had to grow the list or whatever, just to maybe make it a little less daunting while deck building.
I also think if
Well,
once you
let's-
get like over 100 or so, like yes,
Mhm.
the MTG Goldfish and Moxfield and stuff, they have the game changer list, but like imagine every single time you try to build a deck, you're like, oh, I found 5 game changers. That's not what I intended to do and stuff. Like, I feel like it's
Yeah.
good to have a short enough list that it can be like, oh, I have a rough idea of what the game changers are. So when I'm building it, I have that in mind. Like if you always put it in and it's like, I have like 50 game changers, I can't use the system anymore. That's
Yeah.
also a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's get into some of the cards then. So we have a pretty good list that we've all been working on of cards that we think could be game changers, maybe should be game changers. So we're going to kind of just go around the table, throw out some cards, and kind of discuss if they should actually be game changers. Tomer, I think you're first up. Give us a card you think should be a game changer.
Okay. To the surprise of nobody, I will offer up to the council of the Goldfish, Field of the Dead. Field of the Dead, for those who don't know, is a little colorless land, so it can fit into literally every single deck in the game. So if you have a commander deck, you could put Field of the Dead in your deck. And it enters tapped. Oof, that's a drawback. It taps for only colorless. That's it. It's pretty bad too. But when this land or another land you control enters, if you control 7 more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And that sounds like quite a hefty restriction, right? Like you need to have 7 different lands on the battlefield. And in some decks, that is a pretty hefty restriction. Like my mono blue deck that is like 20 islands is not going to get much value out of this. However, out of many years of experience with this card, unfortunately, and a big popularity in this card, I've noticed that this is not much of a restriction at all. Very much so not the issue for most decks, even non-green decks. Green decks obviously can get this online incredibly fast, but even non-green decks, the opportunity cost of having a tap land that doesn't mana fix for you is well worth it because you just vomit out so many zombies. This is a format where fetch lands are all legal, so obviously you could like you could have 2 landfall triggers every single turn with this baby out, and that's just zombies just clogging up the board state. And if you're like if the majority of the metagame is like combat focused, just having an insurmountable number of zombies for such a very low opportunity cost, it kind of is very high impact. And the fact that it can show up in any deck, not just like mono green deck or something. It can show up in any deck. Means that it shows up a lot, and I kind of feel like maybe it should be considered a game changer just because of how powerful it is and how easy it is to slot into any deck.
100%. I think for me, the bar for a colorless card to be a game changer is actually way lower than it is for cards that are colored, just because cards that have colors in them are naturally going to be kind of punished by color identity rules, right? You like, even if a card's really busted, you're not going to see it in every single deck because you can't play it in every single deck. But something like Field of the Dead, you can just play in literally any deck and get value out of it. And we saw this taken to the extreme on Commander Clash a couple seasons ago, where like our meta actually just devolved into like Field of the Dead wars, essentially, where it was Field of the Dead and then copying Field of the Dead. And then we finally house banned it. And I think that was one of the best decisions we made. So I'm 100% with Tomer. This should be on the game changer list. No question.
Yeah, banned in standard. I don't want to see it here either, right? Like, it's too easy. It's just way too easy.
It's also you can't remove it, right? I think that's also the 1-2
Right.
punch.
Strip
with this. It's
mine.
like,
Well, you can remove it temporarily, right? Because usually the decks that are playing this are just gonna loop it again.
Yeah. So green decks
All
are
land-
so good at getting the back on around.
Yeah, all land decks are also secretly graveyard decks,
Yeah.
and then also a lot of decks just incidentally will have Sun Titan style effects or whatever and can get it back anyway. So even if you do answer it, it's probably just coming right back. It's a card that I used to have in almost all of my decks just because, like you said, the opportunity cost is so low. Even monocolor decks can turn it on semi-regularly. And it was just too strong. So I've actually taken it out of most of my decks now, even though like it's technically not a game changer list. I don't have to be counting it, but like it feels like it should be. So I have no opposition to this pick.
I also like that it hits on green the most. And my biggest gripe with the current game changer list is I view green as the most busted color in Casual Commander. And it got off super light on the game changer list. Like, it is like almost non-existent for green. So I like that even though Field of the Dead can go anywhere, it is at its best in green decks. And if this was a game changer, it would slow down the like turbo green rampy stuff a little bit, or like hurt those decks a little bit. And that's something I actually want to see out of the game changer list, is like something to deal with the green issue.
I think it also kind of takes advantage of like brackets 1 and 2, because brackets 1 and 2 specifically say no mass land destruction, and the article clarifies like no blood moon effects, no nothing. These are the most efficient ways of actually dealing with Field of the Dead. I know a lot of people say like green's the best at recurring, so actually mass land destruction is the least effective. I say papa to that. If I have like 5 mana rocks,
I also don't agree with
if
that.
I have 5 mana rocks on the battlefield and I Armageddon you're saying the green player is going to bounce back the fastest. I still have 5 mana rocks on the battlefield. You have to get to 4 to get your Sponge Reclamation or something back onto the to bounce back. So that's like 4 turns of me doing whatever. But but like if you're playing this in bracket 2, I'm not even allowed to run the best answers to this. And bracket 3, if it's a game changer, fine. Then I'm actually allowed some mass land destruction. So
actually, you're slightly incorrect there. Bracket 3 is still no mass land destruction.
No,
Once you get to 4, then you're good. But yeah, so
it's a bad day for Blood Moon.
There's no way you can really
it's so
answer
hard.
this card.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it really. And like you guys said, even if you do strip mine it, like the deck's gonna be built to get it back from the graveyard and like keep popping off. But let's keep moving on. Crim. Why don't you give us a game changer?
Well, okay. So one of the things here is in game changers, I want to see I'm going to mention cards that I think are a little too strong, or very strong, but not fully needing in a ban, but I think too strong for casual. So we have Yuriko as a commander that's just too strong, very busted, definitely deserves to be a game changer. And like that, I think another commander I think that is absurdly strong, especially having played it the most in the last couple of seasons, I think it's Azusa, or my favorite Miku. Mono green Miku. This is one of those commanders where, funny enough, Tomer, you mentioned Field of the Dead. Seth, you mentioned how busted green is in casual commander. I have to say casual 50 times because the CDH comments are going to come pouring in. Once again, casual commander, I think Azusa just goes too hard. Like, first off, you play Azusa on 3, you already get 2 land drops, right? And then it's already done its damage. And then at some later point, now that they've set up their engine, they're going to do the loop, right? They're going to either play the strip mine loop, or do some Raminap excavator shenanigans, fetch, and then just get so far ahead of you that I think it's just too strong for any of the early brackets, right? So I think Azusa, as much as I love my Miku cards, I think this is just enabling and showing you the worst of what green can do in the brackets that aren't really equipped to deal with them.
I like that it hits on green. Like,
yeah,
it does hit.
Also,
fit my hit on green criteria.
Most of my list today, sure, maybe there's other cards that exist outside of green and red, but because my biggest gripe with the game changers list is that green and red had 2 cards each. Right? And I'm like, there is no way you're going to give blue like 42 cards, yada, yada, yada. Same with black and all of these colors, but you're not going to give green and red anything. Like, you're not really docking them for any of it. So I think Azusa is a big one. I think this is one of those mono green commanders like this. Like probably more so than Silvala when it comes to like basic like casual tables. Don't believe me? Then try it. This is I played with a friend. I also played the deck, right, where it was just nothing but like explosive veggies, Farseeks, and Field of the Dead, and Azusa at the helm, and like just Eldrazi's. And I was like flinging these cards and just dropping Eldrazi's on like turn 5.
Yeah.
So it's not hard.
I feel like you're describing every green deck in Commander, though. Like, couldn't you
No,
read
no,
with
no.
Abia or Zavala or Kona or like... I mean, like, I don't, like, yes, Kona can do really busted things, but, like, green, like, is still going to do busted, rampy things, right? Like...
I agree that green will still do busted, like, rampy things, but Azusa specifically, just getting you so far ahead on resources... Kona, let's say I blow up your Kona, or I deal with some of the stuff that you like before you can put them down, right? You're kind of set back there. Azusa, if I blow up Azusa, you've already accelerated 2 land drops. I think this is a very busted commander because it works and it operates on an axis that you can't interact with all too well at casual brackets.
Yeah, so to kind of defend the point that maybe Azusa is a little bit stronger than some of the other green options is because it's legendary, it has the option to sit in your command zone, so even if it is removed, it can get brought back, even if it's not your commander, if it's in the 99. It's a small creature, it's very easy to recur. However, and also it's, yes, very strong if you have like a Crucible of Worlds or something like that and fetch lands. Oh, the Avenger of Zendikar tokens are going to get so big, but you have to remember, Krim, that the average green player is only playing 30 lands in their deck. So I'm just saying, like, I've seen Azusa come down and it's
That's
like,
a
oh,
different
extra land
issue.
drop, and then they're like, so yes, I agree that like the ceiling is really, really high on Azusa, but I feel like the just like the consistency isn't quite there. At least out in the wild. So
this card is so consistent,
look,
though.
I'm also a
You're
green
good at
hater.
Magic, though, Krim.
I'm
You know how to put 39
well,
lands in your deck.
I'm also a green hater. I'm also a green hater, but I don't know if I agree with this one.
I can.
What do you think, Tomer?
I can see it just because like the problem with green is that this is not like a very specific. This is an effect that green has a lot of access to. And I don't even know if Azusa is the best one, but the difference is that Azusa can be in the command zone. Like, I think, for example, Burgeoning is more powerful than Azusa. It comes out on turn 1, and you can start playing lands every single time your opponents play lands. So if you put this on turn 1, if you have like 3 more land drops in your hands, you can just dump them all onto the battlefield before your next turn. 1 for each opponent who's playing a land as well. So, like, these cards are very good. I think the difference is that Azusa sits in the command zone. Which can be quite annoying because it makes it very consistent. You know, every single game you'll have access to Azusa by turn 3 at least.
I think this card is, for example, what Tomer mentioned is exactly the main thing, right? It's in the command zone and you're able to continuously loop Summer Blooms. Now, that is absurd, right? Like, we know Summer Bloom was banned in Modern, and I'm talking strictly gameplay. You may not feel like this is that bad because, oh, it's just ramp, I'm playing Lance. It may not pass the salt check, but I promise you, gameplay-wise, this is busted. Having access to it, and again, like Morgan mentioned, it's only 3 mana. It's dirt cheap to play. When it dies, which, by the way, once you play the 2 lands, you've already paid for the tax. So if it dies, you have 5 mana, you can play it again, and then you go up to 7. So yeah. I promise this may not look like it's going to induce all the salt, but as someone who the one thing I am doing with my, like, if there's one purpose I have, it is to keep an eye on all things that are busted in green.
I mean, boy, it's tough. I think I'm a no on putting it. If I was making the game changer list, I don't think I'd put Azusa on it. But I'm not like a hard no, just because I want to see the green list flesh out a little bit more. And I don't really know how to put ramp spells on there. Like, honestly, I think Open the Way or Nature's Lore should be considered a game changer if you want to power down green. But the idea of putting that as a game changer is just kind of absurd on its face, right? Like, the idea of Nature's Lore being on that same list is just silly, but that's the kind of stuff you need to actually power down green. So if you want to do Azusa, I guess it's fine. But for me, it's not like that offensive personally.
I think also for the viewers, like, the reason why we're all like green is overpowered is I feel like if you're a CDH player and you're listening to this, obviously you're screaming in the comment section right now, being like, "Oh my God, green's not even playable in CDH. What are you talking about?" The lower you go in power, in like the more casual you get in Commander, the more powerful green becomes because just the turns get longer and longer. Instead of like people winning by turn 4 or so, the games go on into like turn 10. And the more time the green has to develop lands, which again are not really, we don't have the tools in casual. We're not allowed the tools in casual to actually answer green. We do not have access to them. Like, again, mass land destruction's not allowed at very casual settings. Blood Moon's not allowed in casual settings. The fact that we don't have any ways of combating this, like any other strategy, means that green just gets a free pass in terms of doing whatever they want and not really having much pushback from the rest of the table. And that's why I think like it's very difficult being like, how do we even nerf green at casual tables if ramp is an issue, because there's so much redundancy. There's like so much. So I can see like just like throwing on an Azusa being like, this is the one that can be sitting in the command zone and that is why it's there. But like I think it's an almost impossible task to just nerf Green's ramp in casual Commander. I don't know how you do
much
it.
Of it, right?
I don't know.
There's
Yeah, I
so
don't know
much
how
of
to do
it.
it. What are you going to ramp? Are you going to nerf like ban rampant growth? Like obviously not. But like,
and even if you did, it wouldn't matter, right? If you ban like the best version, the next best version is only slightly worse. Like think of 4-mana ramping commander. If you ban like the best, like get 2 lands for 4 mana, you just play the next best one. And then the next best, there's like 10 cards that do basically the same thing, but one like you can cycle and one like has this other weird upside that you can have kicker on it. So yeah, I agree with you that there's not really any way to ban it away. So maybe Azusa's like a nice signpost card on the list where it's like, hey, if you're playing casual, like think twice about going crazy with your green ramp because it might be kind of overpowered. But let's move on. Morgan, hit us up with a card you think should be a game changer.
I'm so getting fired. I think the fact that Sol Ring is not on the list is crazy. I'm only going to talk about this for a second. I don't think this is actually worth spending a slot on for an episode, but I think that we put all the other fast mana on there, that logic should step in and say that Sol Ring should also be on there. However, I can respect the prudence to say, okay, just because we should do it doesn't mean that we're going to, just because it's in like 84% of commander decks. That's a little bit much. So that's my 2 seconds I want to spend on Sol Ring. I think it should be there. I understand why it's not,
Yeah,
but it should
It's
be.
the heart and
Sure.
soul.
I mean,
of
it
the
should
format.
be.
I don't
iconic.
agree, but okay. The card I actually want to talk about is Farewell. And the main reason is because we have Cyclonic Rift on the Game Changers list. The comparison is Cyc Rift is often 7 mana, overload it, and you clear the board, you still have a decent board, you get to win the game there. So it's like a 7 mana finisher. The backup is that it's some kind of board wipe where you get to keep your little bit of stuff. But the problem is what often happens with Cyc Rift is that you just hard reset the game and you just added like 5 turns to the game and it takes forever for progress to be made. You don't have the gas to back up that action. It's just kind of miserable. That's why Cyc Rift got added to the list. And I think Farewell does a similar thing. I think that Farewell is one of the stronger Wraths because it's exile and it's flexible. So, yes, there are going to be the games where you can use Farewell to set it up to where you're going to come away less hurt than your opponents, and then you can win the game, in which case it plays very similarly to a lot of the other one-sided board wipes that exist, which I'm a big fan of. But what often happens is that Farewell plays the exact same as Cyc Rift, where you just made everyone really salty because you hard reset the game and you just added like 10 turns to the game. So I don't even think that it's like necessarily like a power reason that Farewell needs to be on the Game Changers list. I don't think it's like a busted card by any means, but between it's very strong and flexible and it's salt inducing because you're adding a bunch of time to the game, I think it's debatably worth putting on there.
I'm with you.
I mean, I think it's going to be very apparent that I will never put a sweeper in a world where the threats are just too good in a multiplayer game where and you need a good clean answer. 90% of the time people are just going to phase out now anytime when you Farewell anyways, right? So
True.
like it's like cool, you spent 6 mana to skip your turn, right? Like it's a
that makes
very
it even
clunky
I just
spell.
cry in Rakdos. Like,
but
Doesn't that make
even
it
if you're
worse,
not
though,
right,
that one
let's say
person
you're
phases
not
out?
in even if you're not in like white, right? It's still a 6 mana sorcery where I think that it's so clunky and I think it's needed. It's a needed answer in Commander. It's whereas like Cyc Rift is instant speed. I could do it on your turn.
True.
You know what I mean? And it's even more flexible because believe it or not, you can cast Cyc Rift as a 2 mana bounce spell. It sounds nuts, but like it is a thing you could do. It's way more versatile and at instant speed, it just makes it more obnoxious. So I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But Farewell, sorcery, 6 mana on your turn, universal, it hits everybody. For the most part.
I feel like this is the very definition of a game changer. Like,
Yeah.
if you want to just talk about a card that has a huge impact on how a game plays out and like literally changes the game, I think just 1 mana hard reset everything. No recursion, no playing around it, no getting back from your graveyard. I don't really buy the argument that Farewell needs to exist. I think Austere Command or the Sunfall or some kind of, there's so many.
I still play Austere Command.
There's so many other options that exist. I don't think you have to have this hard reset everything button. So I actually would be fine with Farewell going on the list. Where are you at, Tomer? You might be the tiebreaker on this one.
I actually think like this with how much power creep there is in protection and recursion these days. I think Farewell is actually very well costed and a good effect. But at the same time, I do acknowledge that it does have like any board wipe, it does slow down the game. And I also acknowledge that a lot of people complain about it. People complain about it all the time. And the Farewell discourse, I am tired of it. I think this card is absolutely fine. Personally, I think power-wise, it's absolutely fine. 6 mana sorcery to wipe the board. I hope to God I actually wipe the board effectively, and get around like a 2 mana heroic intervention or any nonsense. I hope if I pay 6 mana for a sorcery, will actually do its job properly. But maybe there's other ways. Maybe there's other ways of doing a 6 mana board wipe that does the job without resetting the game as hard. Maybe something that's like less effective but one-sided, so you just get all your opponent's stuff. I think Cyclonic Rift is fine, by the way, too. But anyway,
I also think.
Well, I think it's fine.
But I mean, do you not think then, like, personally, I view Farewell. Anybody that despises Farewell usually is doing unfair things. Fair is in the name. My
artifact deck has done nothing wrong. You know this, Krim.
Yeah.
And okay, Tomer, that's the biggest amount of copium, industrial grade copium I've ever heard. I'm saying Farewell is going to make it is really going to punish those who are even doing more unfair things.
I think that slows down the game, though.
I think
sure. That's the only thing. Maybe it slows down the game,
because a lot of
board wipes.
A lot of the other board wipes will be more one-sided, leave more of your stuff untouched, or they're cheaper in mana, meaning that you can start redeploying right after. Or a lot of people like the exile clause because that keeps people from rebuilding. But that's also part of why other board wipes don't drag out the game to the same extent that cards like Farewell do. If you had a really bombastic turn, then yeah, the Farewell is going to probably keep you from winning, but it also means you're probably sitting there with 2 cards in hand and it's going to take forever for anything else to happen. So that's the other thing is I agree that maybe technically on power level it's fine. I don't hate Farewell or anything, but it does drag out the game and does drastically change the game. So I think the fact that I said that sentence means it's a game changer.
Yeah. All right, let's keep moving forward so we can get through some more cards. So I got one that I think we all have to agree on. It blows my mind when I read the bracket announcement. Wizards kind of went hard on extra turns, land denial, combos, but one thing that they left out is stacks. Stacks pieces kind of just gotta pass as far as they aren't excluded by some other rule, and a lot of them are not on the game changer list. So for me, humility is the definition of a game changer that is not on the list anywhere. If you don't know humility, it's a 4-mana enchantment that says all creatures lose all abilities and they're 1/1s. So it's kind of like a Farewell that sticks around forever and even protects itself in some ways, because if you have a Reclamation Sage effect or something like that, well, sorry, your creature is a 1/1 with no ability, so it's not going to be able to above the humility. Talk about slowing the game down to a crawl. If people are trying to win with creatures, it is really hard to get any traction. Why a humility is on the battlefield. And it's also just not only a very powerful card, it's also a very salty card where a lot of people don't like playing against the card. So I think for me, this hits both sides of what we were talking about. It's really strong, and it's also really salty, and it slows the game down, which I don't think most people like. So I don't know. Are there any arguments against humility being a game changer?
As a humility player, no, I think this should totally be on the game changers list. This should 100% be on there.
Yeah, it's weird that I just double checked the article. They talk about mass land destruction. It is weird that it's not there.
Yeah, you just get to stacks people like crazy. Thorn of Amethyst, Humility. That's all. That's bracket one. Bracket one, boys. Humility.
I mean,
got 'em.
but that's like this just kind of removes the bad actor part of it as well, right? Like it's like I think that there's no way to accidentally have humility in your deck.
It's true.
If you put it on there, automatically it's a game changer. I mean, because if you say stacks, right? If I'm getting into the game, I don't know what stacks means.
Yeah.
Like I genuinely have no idea what that means. But if it's on a list, that's much more like identifiable and easy to see.
I think it's worth putting in there just for new players, because I think anybody who's played a little bit knows there's certain cards like that. If we're like, we want to have a chill game, you know, not to have a humility in your deck. You just know just by playing a little bit. But like, if this is for new players, I think it's good to just put it there. You know,
I think that the argument against putting it on the game changer list would just be that like enough people will just know not to do it because they have a moral compass. Because, well, okay, so a lot of people are also just going to be priced out. It is on the reserved list. It's $45. Even if this is an effect you want in your deck, do you want to spend $45 on a card that's on the reserved list? Is it going to get more expensive over time? Probably not. It's probably, you know, there's probably something better and cheaper that you could try putting into your deck. But this is just... It drags out the game, like you said. It is an enchantment, so a lot of colors are going to have a hard time removing it. So I think that there is that argument, but I also agree that, like, for the sake of the new players, just put it on there. Just erase all the confusion. Just make it more clear.
I think exactly of one of my first Commander games with one of my friends. Like, I don't know why people don't try this card out more. And I'm like, oh, that's because that's like a huge stacks piece, a lot. And he's like, oh, what's a stacks thing? And it's like, oh, it's a lockout, right? And it's like essentially a hard lock.
I think if we're looking,
and if you're a creature.
If we like look at like the game changers too, like it's weird that like we have the Tabernacle of Pendrel Veil. I don't know how much money that card is.
3,000.
Yeah,
3,000.
I just looked it up. I was thinking about it too.
Right in the budget.
So like that card is already there. So that's why like maybe there's some cards like Morgan was saying, like maybe it's too expensive, it's too obscure, and those are reasons why it's not there. But then we have Tabernacle, which is like way more inaccessible than Humility is, even though it's colorless. Like it's $3,000. I don't remember the last time I've seen it, but like Humility is just up there with it.
Yeah, just put Humility on there. Now let's back to the top of the order. Tomer, hit us with a future game changer.
Okay. So
please pick from a color that doesn't have any hate.
All
y'all need white cards. There's no short.
I know. Don't worry.
We need this podcast to push the point.
So I don't think there should be balanced distribution on the colors for game changers, by the way, because I think red is actually just the worst color in Commander and has been for quite a while. But there is one card that I do think is a big miss. I think Jessica's Will and Underworld Breach, I think, are very much deserved. But there's one card that I think might have slipped under the radar that I think fits very well with a lot of the other cards that they were targeting and talking about, like accelerates the game too quickly or gives you too many resources for too little investment. And that's Mana Geyser, right? Mana Geyser, 5 mana sorcery. 5 mana sorcery, you make a red for each untapped mana your opponent, or each tapped mana your opponents control. I'm red is my favorite color, or second favorite color. I'm a big Izzet believer, and I play a lot of red decks. I do think they are the suckiest color. However, Mana Geyser does feel like a free win very often because there's no requirement for you other than you are past turn 5 or something, you'll play this card by itself and it will make you 15 or more red mana, enough for you to do basically whatever you want on that turn. Is it going to win you the game immediately? No, but Smothering Tithe also doesn't win you the game immediately by itself, but it just does too much for a single card, and there's not really there's not much of a setup required. There's not much asking for you for deck building restrictions. It gets you way ahead of the rest of the table, much like a Dockside or whatever. And I think it's just too much for a single card.
Yeah, I think it's well above rate. It is well above rate in a multiplayer format. So this does exactly what I despise or don't like to see in a game of Commander, right? It does some seriously unfair things, well above rate what the mana you're getting on that. And it's just that simple. It just enables too much shenanigans for too low of a cost.
We saw it a lot last season at Commander Clash because Richard played a lot of red and had a lot of Mana Geyser games, and
He made it look so good.
it looked busted every time. Pretty much every time. Like, it would just win the game and he would do the thing. And I think to go back to like the philosophy of the bracket thing, at lower levels, one of the things they talked about is not really wanting combos, right? Like, efficient combos shouldn't be part of the game. And I know it's weird to think of one card like a combo, but my experience with people playing with Mana Geyser is it is kind of a one-card combo that you, like, cast this and it generates so much of a resource advantage that you just win that game during that turn by doing whatever you happen to have in your hand. So I feel like I'm totally on board with banning it, putting it on the game changer list. But what do you think, Morgan? Are you there too?
Also, to add on to that, this is going to be one of those things where I know red may not be the most powerful color in Commander, but red's going to pay for the sins of decks that splash red.
No, I think it's too much. I think it's too much for a card, and I think you need to be heavy red to really use it because you're only getting red mana out of it. But nonetheless, even in a mono red deck, like whenever I cast it, I usually
or if you just have a mana sink on board.
Yeah. I usually win the game off it. I Mana Geysered recently, and I didn't win the game, and I was like, my God, this is the worst Mana Geyser I've ever cast.
To me, this is one of like a near perfect example of a game changer because it does have like this huge bombastic effect that as you go up the power scale in brackets, it's not that bad. Like, probably no one's playing this in CDH, right? And in bracket 3, bracket 4, it's probably pretty good. But then you go to bracket 1, bracket 2, this thing is busted because what's really good at the lower brackets? Green decks.
Yep.
And you know what green decks like to do? Tap out and play big creatures. You know what that means? Your Mana Geyser is going to make even more mana. So this is like a perfect card that, like, I think it's like it is really strong, but it's specifically really strong in the lower tiers where green is dominant. So yeah, I agree. I could see a game changer.
In the higher tiers, it's usually a part of a combo, right?
Yeah, because then you can like loop it with like breach or something.
Yeah. And in the lower tiers too, a lot of the free counters are game changers, which powers up these big spells even more. Because if you're playing bracket 4, you're probably gonna have Fierce or Force or something that you could interact with this, even if you're tapped out, or someone could. But if you're playing bracket 1 or bracket 2, you're probably not playing those cards, and you're just gonna lose a game on the spot a lot of the time. So I think that's a good call. Krim, why don't you give us a game changer?
I mean, we talk a lot about tutoring, right? Like excessive amounts of tutors in a deck makes it so that it's pretty busted. You lose the consistency, which, if anything, you want to talk about the vibes of the format, it's a singleton format. So I think, you know what also didn't get that hit that hard? Green. So I think Worldly Tutor, this is a card that is exactly like all the other tutors that are on the Game Changers list. In the color that is going to have 1 million mana. I'm sorry, how is this not on there? Like, between all the green tutors of Worldly Tutor, Natural Order, which is like a super tutor, like, you have all these busted green cards that are just all already on the list, but they're in black and all the other colors, but you don't knock any of the green ones. And when you say, oh, but it's restrictive because you can only get a creature. What?
But there's like,
seriously,
it's also
green.
Enlightened Tutor and Mystical Tutor are game changers, and then Worldly Tutor isn't. And this is why, like, I assume, because it doesn't explain how these cards were chosen. I didn't reach out. I probably should have reached out to Gavin ahead of time, but I didn't. To get an explanation, but I don't think even on the stream when he was talking about these cards, he mentioned how they were actually chosen. I feel like a lot of these were like CDH cards. People were like, what cards are seeing play in CDH will hit it, like Lion's Eye Diamond stuff. So maybe the reason is like you see Enlightened Tutor and Mystical Tutor, but you don't see Worldly Tutor. That's why it's not there. But like in casual, I think like these are they're 100% equivalent, right? A Mystical Tutor versus a Worldly Tutor?
Yes.
What's the difference at like a casual table?
Well, Tomer, don't you know there's no good creatures in the game?
I
think, true.
It was even worse than that, because as they were not banning any of the green tutors, they were also talking about unbanning Primeval Titan, and my brain was just like,
Oh my
do you
God.
guys not
That's
ever
a
play
super
casual
tutor.
Commander? Like, the format you're like building this for is so different than the format that I've been experiencing. I think that Worldly Tutor not being on there is one of the things that makes me kind of wonder about the consistency of this whole list and how they came to that, because they talked a lot through the article about tutors, that lower brackets don't play tutors. Like, you can tell that they thought a lot about tutors as they were making this, because it came up a lot through the whole thing. And then green just gets a complete pass. Not only Worldly Tutor, but I had Natural Order on my list too, which I think is like maybe even a more busted card, or an equally busted card, as a tutor that puts the thing right into play. So yeah, I would put those green tutors on there right away. Like, to me, it seems like one of the biggest oversights in the whole list is like green getting a pass with tutors.
Like, yeah, green is the most busted color in casual, and to leave it unscathed is nuts.
There's a lot.
And so many of the engines that you need in Commander are on creatures.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would say that especially on the lower power scale, that maybe Worldly Tutor is debatably even stronger than some of the other ones. So
Yeah.
the pro green propaganda has been exposed.
I think
Get it out of here.
I just want to also maybe elaborate a little bit on this point, because there's so many tutors we could talk about that's in green. There's only so many slots we could do, but like also all the non-basic tutors that green does, which is a lot. They're very good at it. Like crop rotation, one of the most efficient tutors in the game, puts directly on the battlefield. Archdruid's Charm does the exact same thing. There's like, and then when you start going sorcery speed, there's even more options for you that are very good. I'm kind of baffled that these options aren't talked about that much in the bracket system, and especially when like the very powerful non-basics, like they mentioned Glacial Chasm, thank goodness, but like feel that it's just not there, and like non-basics will only get better and better over time too. So it's like it feels like a very big a bizarre choice not to address these type of cards. Like I got
So-
like basic lands or your fetches or whatever, but like when you can tutor up Field of the Dead for 3 mana at instant speed, or 1 mana at instant speed, isn't that weird?
I mean, I agree with you, I think, philosophically, although I would say I think it gets really hard to do in practice. Like, I think Wizards was like, we're just excluding lands when it comes to tutors, because it's going to be a lot of effort to go through and be like, well, Rampant Growth is technically a tutor, but we're going to allow this one, or this one, like, what about something that could get a non-basic, but it could get a basic? Like, how do we count that? So I think it's just like easy mode to just be like, okay, we're not talking about land tutors, but I do agree with you power level wise. Like, crop rotation's a busted card. Like, Archdruid's Charm in mono green, when you can cast it consistently, it's a really, really strong card that should be thought of as something more than just a Rampant Growth. Like, the ability to snag your best non-basic is incredibly strong, but I don't know, like, it's kind of almost like the how do you power down green ramp in casual using this list. I think you kind of run into that same issue of like, there's just like so many different ramp spells, and like once you get into the weeds of it, it becomes really tough to like keep track of, I imagine.
And it might be something that they don't care to even try to do if they really are considering unbanning primetime. So
I mean,
we might
if
just
you
be doomed.
If you look at the way precons are kind of like also just like really pushing like all this excess crazy mana nonsense,
Yeah.
it clearly shows that like, you know, Magic loves the idea. If primetime is talked about as being taken off, I used to believe you couldn't, and then, you know, I played with them like, oh no, this is nuts. Like, this card is way too
I was the same
Please
way.
don't do
like,
it.
Until we started doing no ban list games. I was like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
primetime, it wouldn't be that bad. Then we played some no ban list games. I was like, oh my god, no, do not unban this card, please. Morgan, hit us with a game changer.
All right. Let's move back to White Crim. Next up, I want to talk about Teferi's Protection. So, Teferi's Protection, you probably know it, you probably hate it. For 2 and a white, it's an instant that says, until your next turn, your life total can't change, and you gain protection from everything, and all your permanents phase out. And then you exile it, so you can't loop it, though there are technically some ways to do it. And it's just kind of busted. A lot of people just say, oh, it's just like white heroic intervention, or, oh, it's just a white fog. And yeah, that's the floor of the card, and often that's all you need it to be. But in a lot of ways, it's the best version of those effects. by a long shot. Because even if it's just like, if it was like comparing it to just a normal fog, your permanents are still there. So someone could follow it up and be like, okay, well, now I'll board wipe and, just pull an extra card out of their hand or whatever. Like Teferi's Protection gets around that. There are other ways to win through a traditional fog. There's other ways to win through a heroic intervention. It's really hard to win through the Teferi's Protection. And a lot of the times, it's just anticlimactic. A lot of the time, someone has this awesome turn. They go for the kill. There's the T-Pro. No one has the counterspell. That person snaps back and wins the game. Or worse, they just did it to drag out the game. I can't emphasize enough how much I hate it when games are just dragged out for no reason. But really, it leads to a lot of anticlimactic moments. And while we have many other cards that do similar things, I just feel like this is so far above the other options that it literally warps the game.
I would say it's even more ridiculous than that. Like, it's so much better than every other option that we have in Magic. Like, if you compare this to a Rootborn Defenses, it's like 3 mana, all your stuff is indestructible. Not even close. But it's even better than like all your stuff is heroic intervention. Is even better than heroic intervention plus fog. It dodges all the exile stuff, all this cyclonic rift stuff. It stops you from being drained out too. So like fogs won't stop you from just like. It usually says prevent combat damage. This prevents all damage. It also prevents like blood artist effects. It prevents all of that. But then even more than that, this is the most egregious part of this in my mind, is that this effect doesn't last until the end of your turn. The end of this turn. It lasts until the start of your next turn. So if you do this and somebody tries to like alpha strike you or something on their turn, well, you peace out, and then the next person's turn, they still cannot attack you. They still can't affect your board. They still can't board you. And if you like the next person's turn, it still doesn't matter. Until it gets back to your turn, you are safe. You are home free from even if the entire board decides you're a threat and they need to take you out. For 3 mana on a single card, you could just be like, nope, can't deal with me. I'm sorry. And that's the most ridiculous thing to me. I think this is the same thing with like the One Ring. The most egregious thing is that it doesn't just affect one person's turn. It lasts until your next turn. And I think there's just nothing, the only thing comparable to that is like the One Ring. But even so, like in terms of like just surviving, this is incomparable to anything in Magic, I think.
And that effect specifically is so annoying because a lot of the times you're the arch enemy and the other 3 players agree that you are the problem. But then after you peace out with the One Ring or the T-Pro, then they're all like, well, I have these attack triggers. I got to get that free value. Then they start punching each other and killing each other.
That's so bad.
We've seen more and more like main phase, like during your turn T-Pros recently too, where people like just fully take advantage of the like triple fog, right? You're just like, well, I got a good board. I'm probably going to win next turn. I guess I just might as well cast this Teferi's Protection and just guarantee that nothing can possibly go wrong. And then I'm going to untap and win that. Like, the card is like, honestly, the card just should not exist. Like, I believe this card is just a mistake and they should have never printed this card. But I think it should also definitely be considered a game chat. Like, it definitely changes the game more than most of the cards we talked about today.
I see.
What do you think?
All right, everybody, let it out, everyone. Yeah.
Wow.
This is the Teferi Survivor group. We're out here, the support group. Let it all out, everybody.
This is Chris protection time.
I think this card's very strong. There's no doubt about that. But my counter argument to this is that if I look at everything that is on the Game Changers list, this is just a non-repeatable effect, right? It's a non-repeatable effect that is it's reactive as opposed to proactive. So it means that more often than not, I have to sit here and hold this card as someone who has had to sit here and hold the card, right? And if you play it, the games where it's like, well, I'm getting wheeled, or I just got to do it. This is essentially a turn 12, turn 10 card that I have on turn 2, right? So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's a bad card. Please do not take it that way. It is nuts. But Rift, you can further your game plan because you're bouncing everybody else's stuff. Force of Will, Fierce, these are above rate because they're free. I think this cost me a very real 3 mana, and on top of that, requires me to have a bunch of stuff out to protect, and allows me, as someone who's constantly arch enemy, for random reasons, by the way, a way to 1v3, right? Like to make it so that if the heat is on you, then you can at least push the heat elsewhere. The card is very good. Do I think this should be a game changer? Yeah, still probably should be. I don't think it needs to be banned, but I think it should be a game changer.
I didn't say ban. I said
okay,
game changer.
Okay. Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement on that. I thought Krim was actually going to say no game changer there for a minute.
That's what I
but
thought.
Like
That's
I
what
hear,
thought.
I hear all these
No.
things, but also like maybe you shouldn't be able to 1v3 the table for 3 mana and a single card. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
There could
Maybe
be
the
argument
curb
there.
stomper should not continue to curb stomp. Yeah.
I mean, but sometimes people get kicked anyways for just being at the table. But you know what I mean?
True.
Like it's unless they're an artifact deck, they need artifact decks.
All right, so I got a green card that I think maybe helps solve the ramp issue. I don't think there's any really solving of this problem, but the more I think about what kind of ramp cards from green could we put on the game changer list that would actually maybe make sense and maybe help to some extent, I think the Great Henge might be the easiest option. So the Great Henge, it's 9 mana, but it usually costs 2 mana because it costs less
9
for the greatest power among creatures you control. It taps to make 2 mana and 2 life, and when a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get a +1/+1 counter on it, and you get to draw a card. So not only is this a ramp spell, not the best ramp spell because green can land ramp, but it combines being a ramp spell with being a very strong card advantage engine. Takes advantage of the fact that green plays a lot of big creatures typically, so usually it's going to be 2 mana. Like in the mid game, it's coming down very cheaply, and then you see people pop off with it and have a big turn where they cast a bunch of spells and chain stuff together. So if we can't realistically put Nature's Lore or Open the Way on the game changers list, I feel like the Great Henge might be the best option for like a ramp spell that actually is kind of game changing and fits like the criteria of the list. But what do you guys think? I think I would put it on the list, but I'm curious what y'all think.
I love this as a signpost card, just because I mean I think the biggest problem I've had with a lot of Magic design-wise, moving from, like 2017 forward, is that before the drawback, once again, was that you had all this ramp, but you had nothing to do. There is none of that anymore. Now you have the ramp draws you a card, and this does that. So this is normally where you would gas out. This is where you refill. So I if you can't just say, whatever, all rampant growths are banned from the game, you can at least hit the card advantage engines that help them run wild, because it's in line with cards like what's the format? Trouble in Pairs. It's in line with a lot of the busted like card advantage engines.
Yeah, I mean, Bolas's Citadel's on there in black, Trouble in Pairs on there in white. Like, not that this is quite to that level, but green has 3 cards on the list, so maybe green, like, we're gonna have to like cut it a little slack when putting green cards on the list.
I'm actually
green
I'm
has
actually
2
okay with
cards
this
on the
card.
list, doesn't it?
I'm
really?
Okay with this card.
Really?
Because
What?
it like, yes, it is a very strong card. And yes, it could slot into a bunch of green decks, but at the same time, you do have to work just a little bit for it to be a very good card.
Do you though?
You do.
By playing creatures in your green deck.
In your green deck?
No, but like if I have
green deck might
like
play a creature?
Wood Elves on the battlefield,
God.
I'm not gonna. The 1 mana discount is not going to make it like, oh boy, like if you.
So
have
you're
to play
telling
this-
me
you have to
this
pay
is
this for
going
4
to
mana.
No, Tomer, it
Yeah.
refills your hand. It refills your hand so fast.
It's very good, but I
Yeah.
just feel like, I don't know, is this so much better than just like an instant speed Return on the Wild Speaker for 5 mana? Just draw, like you have like a 7/7 on the battlefield.
You mean
draw
the
7.
fragile, the very fragile,
Fragile, like it doesn't even.
if I
target.
remove the
You have
thing
one
that you
creature,
but like this does not, like, just unless you remove it itself,
yeah.
like you're just gonna keep going. Like, I think you have to work as much for this as you have to work for Trouble in Pairs.
Trouble in Pairs, it's the
Yeah.
opposite of work. It's you just
I
sit
agree.
there.
I don't think
Yeah.
either card requires any
This
work.
one requires
I
you to
think that-
cast a creature.
Again, what is
No, I just think
Why
like,
do-
like this is
Tomer.
not like it's incredibly good. It's an incredibly good card. I just feel like there's so much redundancy that it's like the green ramp issue. Like, are we going to ban 3 visits or put 3 visits to a game changer? It's like, no, because there's too many of them. I feel like Great Henge is kind of like there. where it's like, yeah, it's very good, but look at all these other things
Great
that draw cards
Henge.
and ramp.
But if we do
Great
that,
Henge
though-
rewards you for doing something you were all basic game actions you were already going to do.
But it has to be
Right?
a big creature. If you're paying it for like 6 mana, it's garbage.
Okay,
well, once
so
you have it on the
basic green
battlefield,
game
any creature
actions.
triggers it.
Yes, but like it's 9 mana by itself. If you have an empty board,
Oh wow, how many times have you seen someone cast this for more than like 3
I'm just
or
saying.
2 or 4?
But also in
Say.
green, even if you had to hard cast it, you still have
Yeah,
half
you
your
could.
mana. So, well, okay. So I agree with Tomer in the sense that in a vacuum, this card is just really pushed.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily in of itself worthy of being banned or a game changer or anything like that in a vacuum. The problem is we have so many of these effects in green. Like they ramp, they draw cards, and yes, technically you work for it, whatever the heck that means. But you're a green deck. You're probably playing creatures anyway, so it's like work that you're gonna do anyway. So like, yeah, that shouldn't really count.
It's like when I recorded
But-
against the odds. Like, I'm working, but I'm actually just playing Magic, which was what I was going to do anyway.
Yeah, you were gonna do that anyway.
well, like if I'm playing
So-
an elf ball deck, obviously I'm not running Great Henge. Like what my
Sure.
2/2 elves are not going to give me that enough of a discount. That's what I mean. It's like, okay, I'd rather just run Beast Whisper
Well, yeah.
or something.
Actually,
you know? Like,
this
But
is
couldn't you
pretty
make that argument
easy.
about all the game changers? Like all the game changers, you could say like, yeah, it's really
No.
good in a lot of decks, but there's going to be some decks where you obviously don't care to run it. Or
no,
whatever.
like
but
Teferi's
I think-
protection. If you're in white, you just run Teferi's protection, right?
Yeah.
You're in red, you run your mana Geyser. Like these are the cards that I think are like or breach.
But
or
then like
whatever.
not all cards want breach, but not all decks want breach, right?
Most
So
of them
that's
do.
kind of where.
Oracle.
So the Great Henge, the reason I think it's actually a good addition to the Game Changers list is because you don't really have to go down the slippery slope, right? Part of the problem with green cutting off their ramp is that that's just kind of what green does. If you start nicking away at their ramp, where do you draw the line? Where do you stop? Like, I think we can all agree that like mana dorks don't really need cut, right? But then like the land ramp, there's so many of them that once you start going down there, like it's hard to stop. Great Henge is kind of a beast in of itself. Great Henge is ramp. It's also gaining life, which matters more often than you think. It's also growing your creatures, which matters more often than you think. And it's also drawing you cards by taking basic game actions that you're going to take anyway. So I think it's easier to put this in the Game Changers list as opposed to most other ramp because it sits off by itself as this other animal that you don't have to go down the deep rabbit holes of the other ramp engines that you have access to in green. So I think it's actually one of the easier picks.
Yeah, it's
I
a
like-
one-card engine, right? It's a one-card
is.
engine.
Yeah.
I do agree with Tomer to some extent that like green is just a really tough color. Yes, there's a lot of other cards that can do the same thing, but I feel like because green, maybe this is what happened with Wizards, that they had the same conversation. They're just like, well, you know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of other cards that do the same thing, and then we end up with a non-existent game changer list for green. So I feel like we got to loosen the criteria a little bit for green, just because
Right.
it's the best color and it's so hard to ban. So I'm a little more willing to like, if it's on the edge, put it on the game changer list for green than I would be for like blue or black or some of the other colors.
I'm okay with putting this on if it's like, if this is considered the most egregious thing of what it's doing, then sure, I'm okay putting it there.
Well, all right. Let's do one more round. It doesn't have to be a lightning round, but let's keep it relatively short for one last round because we're already at like an hour and 10 minutes. So
Yeah.
one last round. Tomer, kick us off with another game changer.
I'm stealing one from you, Seth, because this one is
Go
this
for
is
it.
a pretty easy one, I think. Mishra's Workshop. Mishra's Workshop. I thought it was. I said Mishra's Factory before, and I got destroyed in the comment section. Mishra's Workshop is not Mishra's Factory. It's a reserved list card that is almost $3,000, and it says
Chump
tap
change.
to add 3 mana of any color, of 3 colorless mana to your mana pool. This may only be used to cast artifacts. So if you play this on turn 1, you have 3 mana worth of stuff to do, but you can only pay it towards colors costs and only to artifacts. The only reason why I don't see this card much, you know, I don't see this card too much. But then I look at the game changers and I see like there are a bunch of random stuff like Lion's Eye Diamond, for example, which I also never see outside of like a casual table or anything where these game changers would typically matter. And I know like Ancient Tomb is there. I know you know, like these type of effects, these fast mana effects, Chrome Mox, Grim Monolith, Mana Vault, Mox Diamond, all these things are here. So I'm like, why not Mishra's Workshop? It seems odd that it's kind of left out. Obviously it's very narrow. You only put it in an artifact deck, but then the artifact deck just gets to start with 3 mana on turn 1. That seems excessive.
And it's $3,000. When it comes to cards that cost $3,000 and are on the reserve list, most people can't afford to play with them anyway, right? At least as far as real copies. I guess you can proxy them up, but there's a huge accessibility issue there as well. So when I see a card that's that expensive, I'm even more willing to put it on the Game Changers list, because just most people aren't going to be able to have access to it.
Yep, checks all the boxes.
But then it takes one of the slots, right? Like, what's funnier is we can add a lot, but I think that this card, it's busted beyond belief. There's no world where I'm going to not say that, but I don't think an artifact deck needs this.
I mean, I would run
okay,
if
it
I
doesn't
had
need
one.
it, but
I think
I would too.
play it.
You don't need it, but boy, it's busted.
This is a different topic.
But
if I would replace a card with it, I would actually take out the cards that you would never see at a casual table, but only in CEDH. Because then I feel like, I don't know, when was the last time you've ever seen an LED or any pickup game where somebody's I got pub stomped by somebody going turn 1 LED into Grim Monolith? That just it doesn't happen. I don't know why it's a game changer if it's if you literally just see it in CDH. If you gave me an LED and you said you can put this in any of your deck, I'd be like, no thank you. I don't, this is actively bad for most of 99% of my decks would not want an LED actually.
But
so
this
I would
is
just replace
generic. It's generic fast mana, right?
It's
as opposed to this, it is awful. But more often than not, I will see an LED and Mana Vault and the Mox Diamonds and stuff than a Mishra's Workshop, right? I think the problem here is, without expanding the list to 50 million cards, just this would if we're going back and digging up old busted cards that we just don't see, the list of Game Changers moves up to 100 easily.
Yeah.
So if you want to keep the list to a
there.
minimum,
Yeah.
Tabernacle, I think, that one is a weird include, because also I don't know why that's on there. So I personally don't think I would put Tabernacle on there, but that's just because it's such a card you don't see at all.
I just not adding them if they're too obscure. That's a valid argument. If you're these cards don't deserve to be on the list because nobody actually plays them, then yeah, I would be okay, don't put in Mishra's Workshop. I don't remember the last time I've ever seen it. But then also take out Tabernacle and stuff, because
I agree. I think you should take out Tabernacle.
That's what I feel like. We went from the Commander RC, where one of my biggest gripes with the ban list was just inconsistency. And now seeing Tabernacle versus Mishra's factory, Mishra's Workshop. That was for you YouTube comments. Mishra's Workshop. It makes me think that we have the same amount of we're trending in that inconsistent path again, because I just don't see if you're not putting Tabernacle on there, why don't you have Factory on there, Foundry on there? I don't really understand. So I hope they get more consistent with it, because that's what drove me crazy with the old system too. But let's move on. Krim, Game Changer us. Final round.
Okay, so rather than just naming 14 more green cards, I'm actually going to name
one green card.
15 more green cards.
15, yeah. I'm going to rapid fire.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with a red card. This is once again a little bit of sins, red paying for the sins of other decks splashing red, but Birgi, the god of storytelling. I think the precedent of why this card is on here for me is because you don't want combo in the early brackets and whatnot of casual commander. This is always a centerpiece of some way of a blue-red deck, a spell slinger deck, just going off easily, just constantly generating mana, because whenever you cast a spell, add a red until end of turn, you don't even lose the mana as the phases change and whatnot, right? Obviously, the bow stuff is irrelevant. But the main thing here is just a creature that sits there and nets mana. How many times have you watched this sit, and then you know that if you don't answer it, the following turn is about to be nuts? I I think this is just a prime creature that is going to just always enable some kind of storm, spellslinger nonsense that should not be free to roam in lower brackets. So it should be on a game changer list, because then when you go into bracket 3 and 4, those decks are more equipped and ready to deal with it, but it keeps Birgi out of 1 and 2.
I will accept this as yet another nerf to my worst color. But then why not throw also Displacer Kitten into the
I agree.
the game list? I think it's like
fully
equivalent, right?
agree.
Like they're both. I think Displacer Kitten is much
Yeah.
better because you don't actually have to storm a fit. You just make infinite value, even if you're not untapping.
I think
rocks
both are very good. So I fully agree with that. If we sat down and had a Crim's game changer list, I think Displacer Kitten would 100% be on there.
All right, you got my vote. I'll put Birgi on. I don't even play it anyway, so fine.
This one's tough for me because I just don't really see many people play Birgi, and I feel like there's a lot of additional Birgis. Storm Kiln Artist. Whenever you cast Instant Source, you get a treasure. Urabrosk. Whenever you cast Instant Sorcerer, you make a red man. Like, there's a lot of other effects that are essentially the same thing that you could even argue are better than Birgi. So it's hard for me to see this one as a game changer personally.
I mean, I fully agree that Storm Kiln Artist is also a game changer.
No,
I think those are.
It's not.
no.
What?
So many
The
Spellslinger
constant
decks play that.
generation.
It's very good, but
It's really-
I've seen
it's
it
really
being played
good.
so often, much more than I see it being played as a combo piece. Like, you have to let red make mana somehow. Come on, just a little bit.
And the bracket system says that combos are no-nos in lower brackets. It doesn't say that Storm is not allowed
Storm
in
is
lower
a combo
brackets,
deck.
right? And well, okay, yeah, but
That's but come on, right?
I might be biased.
Storm is
I
just
might be
bad
biased just because I
combo.
think Storm's a cool archetype. Maybe I'm a little biased.
Bad
but
actor, bad actor, bad
Yeah,
actor.
Yeah, like that.
But I don't- I don't know.
Would you honestly
it's
sit
fine.
down with a straight face, smile at a bracket 1 and 2 table, and say, "Yeah, I'm playing my Storm deck." I would not sit there and play that deck.
Yeah, maybe.
No.
Right,
All right.
I could see it either way. I don't think your argument's bad.
Honestly, Graham, I saw you had another red card on your list, which was Mizzix Mastery. If you went with Mizzix Mastery,
No,
I would be hard slamming yes on that one because I feel like that is very game changery. So I think you picked the wrong red card for winning me over on this one.
But
God,
these are just all parts of the pieces. Like, again, there's just so many there's so many cards that I think are left off of red and green. So, and I think Mizzix Mastery is just another Underworld breach. So yeah.
It's just so tough because red is so bad. With green, I'm like, oh my
what
god,
good cards does red have
because it's so busted.
Yeah,
and then with red, I'm like, oh, red sucks so much. I don't know. Like, do they need any game changers? Like, I'm just not shook by playing against red.
The best argument against Mastery is that it takes 9 years to resolve.
But
That's the best.
I feel like
for,
if you have to
playing it,
do
it's game
a
changer,
significant setup for a card to be good, I feel like it's okay to be very good. Like Mizzix Mastery.
Yeah.
If I'm not in a Spellslinger deck, what's it doing? Nothing. It's trash. And then I still have to have I can't just fire it off turn 4 or something. It has to be a late game thing, or I have to be in self mill, which is even more steps. The more hoops something has to be good, I think the more chill it is.
I don't know how
I
many hoops
agree
you
with
think you have to.
but I feel like that's not true of Mizzix Mastery. I feel like it's the same argument people make about Underworld Breach, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I gotta do all this setup, it's so much work. I'm like, no, every time anyone plays that, they just win the game. I don't want to hear your it takes effort, because it doesn't actually take out. Mizzix Mastery, yes, you have to be in a Spellslinger deck or something, but it's not like you really have to do anything. You just play the game and you cast your spells, and eventually you're like, oh, I got a bunch of mana, I got a bunch of spells in the graveyard.
what about,
I have Mizzix Mastery.
What about Breach the Multiverse? Oh, I cast one spell.
Oh, God,
I get 4
I don't like that
creatures
card,
on the
yeah.
battlefield.
That card is so random, though.
Oh,
It's
I could actually see an
genuinely.
argument for that.
it's
being
But you
really-
don't have to. You don't even have to build around it. You even get your opponent's stuff, and then I cast Eerie Ultimatum. Oops, I get everything from my graveyard onto the battlefield. Oops, I cast Replenish. All my things from my graveyard go onto the battlefield because I'm Enchantress.
Replenish
I feel
is
like you're-
nuts.
describing game changers, actually. Now that you mention
Yeah,
these
yeah,
cards, I'm like, wait,
but
actually,
no,
maybe
no.
these
Back
all
up.
are actually game
No, these are
changers.
they're hoops.
But in reverse.
They're hoops. Like what's the hoop for Jessica's will?
Hoops.
Oh, I have 3 mana and one of it's red. It's like no,
Yeah.
like come on.
What hoop is there for Eerie Ultimatum? Right? Like, I think Eerie Ultimatum is a nuts card.
You have
It's
to
the
have
only thing
stuff
that
in
it's
the grave.
we're lucky
The
that
colors.
it's locked behind 3
Yeah.
colors.
Yeah,
That's the only thing.
Yeah.
If that were like a white card, that would be on.
You'd have to ban like the
sure.
ban list. Like if their hoops were not a criteria, you'd have to have like 500 cards because anything that has
Yeah.
like a big effect would just be like, oh well, I guess that's too big. No, boom,
Game changer.
game changer, boop.
Not to
All right.
confuse game
Gishath
changers with
hit
win
somebody and put too many dinosaurs on the battlefield. Boop, banned. Game changer. No,
Win
not
cons
banned.
are fine. I think win cons are fine. I think
Okay.
we're kind of like blurring the lines between what's a game changer and a win con. I think win cons are totally acceptable. I think cards like, Hoof and all the whatever
Oracle.
9+ mana cards that are going to just win the game when you cast them, they should win the game. You're spending 9 to 10 mana, right? So, but Mizzix Mastery is, that is just a busted card. I think that is just essentially, if Underworld Breach is on there, then I think Mizzix Mastery should be too.
All right,
Disagree.
Morgan, why don't you hit us up with one more game changer?
All right, I'll go back to green for my last card. I think Constant Mist should be in discussion. It's just 2 mana fog, except it has buyback of sacrifice a land. The problem is, when you get to the late game, the green deck has so many lands, they don't mind going down the land to have it repeatable. And even if they are worried about it, maybe they are a little pinched on mana, they probably have ways to get their lands back anyways. So a lot of decks just have a really hard time beating this. It's like you need a counter spell or something like that. It's very hard to stop Constant Mist for the decks that actually want it. And I think besides the fact that it's $12 or $13, I think a lot of green decks could just play it no matter what, even if they don't really have a land package, even if they don't really have a graveyard recursion theme. I think just most green decks could afford to run it. And a lot of fogs, you just need the one-time use, and that's good enough. This is so easy to keep using, and then it's really hard to beat it. So I think it's in the running. It doesn't affect the game the same way that T-Pro does, where it's like, well, how the heck do I win through this? There are ways to still win. Like you can still do like draining and, mill them out or, something. There are ways to still win through it, but it's so easy to abuse.
This 100% I think should be a
Fully
game changer. I think when you look at lower brackets and think about like the flavor decks in bracket 1 or even pre-con level decks in bracket 2, this is the exact kind of card that those decks should not have to play against, because a lot of decks, it's very similar to Glacial Chasm, really, where the same jank 'em out play pattern, where it's like, I did this one card in my super casual flavor deck just is not built to interact with this. So I'm just like literally drawing dead. And I think that you'll see the same exact thing with Constant Mist out of a green deck, where a lot of lower power decks are just going to be like, oh, okay, well, I guess you drew that one card and now my deck can't do anything. So you win, I guess. And I think that's like a horrible way for a low-powered commander game to end. So I would put it on there just for like brackets 1 and brackets 2 primarily. Like it's fine, I think, at bracket 3 and bracket 4 if you want to spend a game changer on it, but I don't think that's the experience that players playing the lowest levels really want.
It's definitely beatable, but I just think like when you're able to just consistently cast fog every single turn, and I think any green deck is able to do this. Like by the time you want to be casting fogs, if you cast like just like 2 rampant growths that game, let's say it's turn 7, you have 9 mana on the battlefield, you could it's very easy to just be like, okay, every single time I cast this, I'm going to sacrifice a lane. Like what? My spells cost 5 mana. I can keep doing this for like 3 turn cycles, and by that point, I should already win the game. That's the main issue. I don't think it's unbeatable, but I feel like it is a game changer because it fits in any green deck. I think any green deck will get stronger and just shut down a lot of different decks at like lower brackets if you just put this in here.
Full agree.
All right. Last card. And this one, I think Tomer might have had on his list too. We haven't talked about any black cards today. Black had I guess a reasonable number of game changers to start off with. Bolus's Citadel, some tutors, Oppo Agent, Turgid, Ad Nauseam. But there's one card that I was shocked wasn't on the list because it was one of the first cards. When I heard game changers, one of the first cards I thought of was this card. And that card is Necropotence. So Necropotence, triple black mana, skip your draw step. You can, whenever you discard a card, you get exile from your graveyard, whatever. The big deal is pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library face down, put the card into your hand to be near your end step. So it's essentially pay a life to draw a card on your end step. Yeah, there's the downside that you skip your draw step, but really what this is 3 mana, I get to refill my hand every turn. You actually over refill your hand a lot of times, so you get a little card selection in there too, and discard a couple of the hand size and keep the good ones. In any commander format where you start with 40 life, effects like this are just incredibly strong. In 60 card formats, if you're going to pay 10 life, there's actually a risk that you end up just dying to something. You get burnt out of the game or 1 attack. But when you have 40 life, it is pretty easy to spend 20 of that life over the course of a game on a Necro, and that should be enough to win you the game. So just the amount of card advantage that this card can generate for a single card, I think it's got to be considered a game changer, right? Like, I don't know how you couldn't consider it that, but what do you guys think? Is there any counter arguments to Necro on the game changer list?
I think we did a podcast or something, and I can't remember who. It was Richard or some of y'all were like, this card's okay. It's not, it doesn't.
What? That sounds like
it might have been Richard.
That sounds like a Richard
I don't remember, but like,
I can't imagine me saying that. I love drawing cards, but maybe.
Because I remember I was like, okay, I just need to show you all. Okay, if you don't believe that this card is not good anymore, yeah, this card is nuts.
It sounds.
I do not think this card should be free to roam. It is, and if it is, it needs to be one of your game changers.
This was the mission of this, and the inclusion of Ad Nauseam was why I was like. The game changer philosophy is definitely aimed at CDH, right? Like, I think I won't say because I might have misremembered it, but I believe the philosophy was that Ad Nauseam is actually better than Necropotence, and that's why Ad Nauseam was there. I believe that's what was said on stream. Please don't hold me to it. I'll double check afterwards. But then I was like, this is wild. Like, yes, at CDH tables, when your average, the mana curve of your deck is like 1, then Ad Nauseam is just much better than Necropotence because you can just like draw like whatever 20 cards or whatever off Ad Nauseam, even more, and then at instant speed before your end step, and then you just go onto your turn and win. And you find whatever the cards you needed and win. But like at a casual table where this is not like just untapping and winning the game is not that often happening at like turn 3 or whatever. A Necropotence is just like way better, especially when the average mana value of your deck is like 3. Then it's
you can't
way
even play
better.
Ad Nauseam. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever I put Ad Nauseam in my Selenia deck, but because I actually do want to go to 0 life. But I think like in most casual decks, 99% of the time, a Necropotence is going to be tremendously more powerful than an Ad Nauseam. So it is kind of bizarre to me that Necro's left out and Ad Nauseam's here. It really feels like you're kind of making a game changer list for CDH at that point. Like you're not actually casual, which is not the intended audience.
Which is actually hilarious because you can play any number of game changers in brackets 4 and 5. So this list actually literally does not matter at all to CDH.
Yeah.
Like it matters 0%.
That's why I was like, Kinnon's here. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It is kind of cards that are salty in casual and cards that are good in CDH. I think that is what I think of the game changer list at this point. Powerful in CDH or salty in casual. But
I think the one argument against Necro would just be that the whole your life is a resource thing, I think, is kind of an overused statement. Like, yes, you have 40 life instead of 20, but it is going to run out. I have seen people quite often die to like a Bolus's Citadel or something because they were just a little too ambitious, you know? So those things do happen, but like Necropotence, you can do it slowly. You can just do 1 life at a time, and it's insane.
Yeah, you don't have to be greedy. Just do I do pay 5 life. I go back to 7. I don't even need to I don't even need to if you're worried about discarding, you don't even have to discard. You play it super super safe, and then you have infinite card draw for the rest of the game for 3 mana.
You gotta go at least 10. You gotta live a little. You haven't lived until you go down to 1 life with your Necro and just hope for the best. Anyway, I think those are our game changers. But let us know in the comments. We're still in beta, like we talked about before. Wizards has explicitly asked, give feedback on this, because it's not finalized yet. What do you want to see on the list? What should we change about the list? So if you ever want to have an impact on the Commander format, from now until like April or whenever they make the full announcement, this is the time that you can have the most impact on what this list looks like. So let us know in the comments what you think should be on the game changer list, or if anything should come off the game changer list. You can let us know that as well. So thanks for watching, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed this week's podcast. We, of course, will be back next week with another one. Until then, have a great week, and this is a crew signing out.